Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. When you move, I'll move. I will follow you. Oh, hello. Sorry I didn't see you there. I was just finishing up making some bread. Well, come on in. Kind of made a mess here. Oh, don't worry, my servants Nick and Carl will clean that up for me later. So, you're here to hear my story, huh? It seems so strange to me. I don't really feel like my story is all that exciting, and I certainly can't take any of the credit for it. All the glory belongs to Yahweh. But let's see, where should we start? Well, I guess it all starts right here in Bethlehem many years ago. My mother-in-law, Naomi, was living here at the time with her husband and her 2 sons. Well, you know my mother-in-law, Naomi. Yeah, she's pretty great, that mother-in-law, Naomi. Well, anyway, there was a famine in the land. So Naomi, Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion all packed up and headed to the country of Moab in hopes of finding some more food. Seems kind of ironic that Bethlehem, which means house of bread, was all out of food, but they were. So they went to Moab, and well, once they arrived, Naomi's husband tragically passed away, leaving her a widow with 2 sons. This is where our stories cross paths. At the time, I was just a young Moabite girl living with my mother and father, when one day I met this cute boy. He was an Israelite, and he talked and acted different from any Moabite boy I had ever seen. Well, you know those foreign boys and their accents. I found him very intriguing and charming. Well, needless to say, my parents weren't thrilled about me seeing an Israelite. They especially found his religious beliefs strange. What do you mean he only worships one God, they would say. How can one God be in charge of everything? It was kind of a strange concept for those of us who worshipped many gods. But again, I found it kind of intriguing. So Mahlon and I kept seeing each other, and finally my parents relented, and we got married. It was a good day. So I joined Mahlon and his brother, who also married another Moabite girl named Orpah, and Naomi, of course. So the 5 of us had some very happy years together. I remember some of those times they would tell us stories about all the Israelite traditions. They would tell us stories about Father Abraham with his many sons and the Passover, and how Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt. They told us all about this God called Yahweh. Well, after about 10 years or so, the unthinkable happened. Both my husband and his brother passed away, leaving myself, Orpah, and Naomi, all 3 widows. It's hard to put into words the despair we all felt in those times. We all handled our grief differently. Orpah became very withdrawn. Naomi, bless her heart, became very bitter, especially towards Yahweh. She could not understand why her God would abandon her in this way, a widow with no sons and in a foreign land. I, on the other hand, tried to swallow my grief by keeping busy and trying to take care of the other 2. But in our grief, we all clung to the one thing we still had, and that was each other. After a period of mourning, Naomi decided she would travel back to her homeland in Israel. I couldn't say I blamed her. She had nothing keeping her in Moab. She had no family there, and the famine was over back in Israel. There was once again bread in the house of bread. So we all packed up our stuff and began this long journey back across the Jordan River to the land of Israel. As we traveled, Naomi was unusually quiet. She seemed distant, like lost in her own thoughts. Finally, not very long into our journey, she stopped. I said, "Naomi, what's wrong?" And she looked at us with deep pain in her eyes and said, "Ruth, Orpah, you girls should turn back. Go back to your families. You can remarry and start a family and have a future. If you continue on with me, there's no future for you." Of course, Orpah and I said, "Naomi, we can't leave you. I mean, we were all she had." But Naomi, being the stubborn yet selfless woman that she is, insisted and stood her ground, saying we should turn back and go to our own families. Well, after many tears, Orba finally gave in, and she headed back to her family in hopes of starting a new future there. I miss that girl. I hope she's doing okay. Well, for as stubborn as Naomi is, I must be 10 times more stubborn because she could not pry my fingers from her. I said, Naomi, stop trying to get me from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. See, I told you I was stubborn. Some people say I get that from my mom. Anyway, I knew what I was signing up for. I knew that Naomi had no way to provide for me, no more sons for me to marry. My future looked bleak in Israel compared to what I could have had in Moab. But I loved Naomi, and I had grown to love the Israelite traditions as well, and Yahweh. There was something about this God called Yahweh that just kept tugging on my heart. Have you ever felt that before? Like God was tugging on your heart, drawing you to him? It's a hard thing to describe, but in that moment, I just felt that I was supposed to follow not only Naomi, but Yahweh. Whatever hardships and obstacles came along with that, I felt this call to be faithful. And so, in that moment, I declared my allegiance to both Naomi and to Yahweh. I would not leave her. Her people, the Israelites, would be my people, and her God, Yahweh, would be my God. And so we traveled across the Jordan back to this little town of Bethlehem, the house of bread. Once we arrived there, we had to figure out what we were going to do. We had to come up with some way to provide for ourselves, and being two single ladies in those days was no easy task. In my mind, I wondered what sort of things we would have to resort to. Would we have to become beggars? Would I have to do the unthinkable and resort to prostitution? We had to come up with some way to survive. Well, then Naomi told me about this really cool Israelite tradition. I guess when the harvesters would go through the fields, whatever they dropped and missed, they would leave for the poor and needy to come and gather. How cool is that? So I told Naomi, well, I'll go and glean in the fields and see what I can find for us to eat. So that first morning I set out, started gleaning behind the harvesters, picked a barley field, and started working. Now, I was a little nervous. Being a single lady in a field full of men can be a little dangerous. But I just kept my head down and kept working, only taking one short break. A little later, I noticed another man coming and approaching the harvesters. I kept working, but kept one eye on him. He seemed to be important, like he was in charge of the others or something. Well, pretty soon, this man starts making his way towards me. My heart began to pound. What did this man want with me? Was he going to harm me? Was he going to tell me to go find a different field to glean in? I wasn't sure. But as he got closer, he greeted me warmly and said, "My daughter, don't go to any other field to glean, but stay here with my harvesters. I have told my men not to lay a hand on you. And if you get thirsty, feel free to help yourself to our water jugs." I was shocked at this man's kindness. I later found out his name was Boaz. I said, "Why have I found favor in your eyes? After all, I'm just a foreigner." And then he said something that shocked me even more. He said, "Ruth, I have heard of you and all the ways you have served your mother-in-law, how you left your homeland and came to a land to live with people that you didn't know. May the Lord repay you for what you have done." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He had heard of me? Little old me, Ruth, the Moabite? I guess my reputation had preceded me. I think about that a lot, how in a foreign land where I had met no one, they had heard of me and my actions. Makes you wonder what kind of reputation are you setting with your actions, because our actions reveal our character, and like it or not, our reputations matter. Well, anyway, this man's kindness did not stop there. Later at mealtime, he offered me some food, so much so that I had some left over. And then, at the end of the day, I can't be for sure, but I'm pretty sure he told his harvesters to leave a little extra barley behind, because when I got done at the end of the day, I had so much grain I could hardly carry it all home. Naomi was beyond thrilled when I got home with my arms full. She asked where I had gleaned that day, and so I told her all about this man Boaz and his kindness. Now, this is where the story really gets crazy. I guess Boaz was a close relative of Naomi's, and according to Naomi, he was one of our kinsman redeemers. Oh, what's a kinsman redeemer, you ask? Let me tell you. So, a kinsman redeemer is a Jewish tradition in which a close relative would redeem someone from some sort of hardship, either through freedom from slavery, purchasing land, or continuing on the family name through marriage. So in our case, our kinsman redeemer could purchase the land that Naomi technically still owned, as well as marry me as a way to continue on her family name. What are the odds that the first field I picked to glean in just so happened to belong to one of our kinsman redeemers? Seems like a pretty big coincidence, but I've learned that there's no such thing as a coincidence when it comes to Yahweh's plans. So after that first day in the field, Naomi began to hatch a plan. She's always coming up with some sort of plan, especially when it comes to providing for her family. Moms are great that way. They're always putting their families first. You know, they should make a holiday just for celebrating moms. You heard it here first. Anyway, Naomi had heard that Boaz was going to be winnowing his barley that night at the threshing floor. Now, I don't know how familiar you all are with agriculture, but winnowing is when they would take the barley, they would throw it up into the wind to separate the grain from the chaff. And they usually did it in the evening when the wind picked up. And then afterwards, they would spend the night by their big pile of grain to make sure no one stole anything. So this is what Naomi told me to do. She told me to get all dolled up, anoint myself with the good smelly stuff, put on my best robes, and head down to the threshing floor. And then, she said, when Boaz lays down by his pile of grain to sleep, go over, lift up the blanket, and lie down, and he'll tell you what to do. Now, I know I'm still pretty new to this whole Jewish culture, but she wanted me to lift up the blanket and lay down at his feet. Was she nuts? I was pretty sure that, according to ancient customs, this was essentially like a marriage proposal. It seemed awfully bold to me, but I trusted Naomi, and she had never let me down before, and so I took her advice. Sometimes God asks us to do bold things, and we have to trust that He'll work everything out for His glory. So that night, I did exactly as she said. I got all dolled up. I snuck down to the threshing floor. And then when Boaz lay down by his pile of grain, I went over and softly lifted up the blanket and laid down. Well, I laid there and laid there and laid there for what felt like days, practically paralyzed with fear of what was going to happen. When finally, I think it was around midnight, Boaz rolled over in his sleep and felt me at his feet. He startled awake, and my heart began pounding. He said, "Who's there?" I said, "It's me, Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over me, for you are a redeemer." I get embarrassed just thinking about how awkward I was in that moment. And it kind of seems like a weird thing to say, huh? Well, let me backtrack a little bit. Remember when I told you how I first met Boaz in that field and how he had heard of me and all that? Well, in that moment, he also offered up a prayer to God on my behalf. Now, I wrote this prayer down. Hold on a second. I'll tell you what he said. I'm a little sentimental that way. I write down things that are important to me. This is what he said. "The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Now, fast forward to this marriage proposal. I asked Boaz to spread his wings over me. So, in a way, I was kind of asking Boaz to be the answer to the prayer that he had offered on my behalf. Let me tell you, the Lord works in mysterious ways, and sometimes He answers our prayers in the most unexpected way. So, there you have it. I, Ruth, the Moabite, had just proposed to Boaz, a much older Israelite man. Pretty bold, huh? Well, the Lord rewarded me for my boldness because guess what Boaz said? He said, yes! Well, sort of. I guess there was another relative that was more closely related who had dibs, I guess you could say, on being our Redeemer. So Boaz, being the honorable man that he was, wanted to give this man first chance at being our Redeemer. But he said, if this man was unwilling, then he would be our Redeemer. In other words, he would purchase the land that Naomi still owned, as well as marry me in order to continue on her family name. Praise Yahweh! This is great news. He sent me home that morning with another armful of barley, of course, and told me he would settle the matter that day. Now, the conversations that happened later that day are a little unclear to me as, well, I wasn't there, and I was still new to this whole Jewish culture. But I guess this other relative that was more closely related was unwilling to redeem us, as in doing so, he would have to split up his inheritance that he had reserved for his current children. So then there was something to do with 10 witnesses and a sandal. Yeah, that's right. The relative gave Boaz his sandal as a sort of symbol of handing over his right to this land, or something like that. I don't know. All I know is Boaz came home with an extra shoe and said, we're getting married. And that, folks, is my happily ever after. The Lord blessed us with a little boy, our sweet little Obed. And Naomi, who was once so bitter towards Yahweh, now praised him for his faithfulness. For he had redeemed us. And he can redeem you too, if you remain faithful and obedient. Wow, I guess maybe my story is a little more exciting than I thought. It's fun to look back and see how God was working. And who knows, maybe this Messiah that everyone keeps talking about will someday come and redeem us all. Well, anyway, I better get back to this bread and get it in the oven. And it's almost time to feed that chubby little boy, little Obed. It takes a lot to maintain that figure. Well, thanks for stopping by to hear my story. See you later. Yahweh, thank you so much for how you have provided for me. Thank you for a mother-in-law who loves me and treats me as her own. Thank you for using me in my story, just an average Moabite girl, to bring glory to your name. And thank you, God, for my Redeemer. Amen.
Thanks, Ruth. That's going to be the end of our service. If anybody would like to come up for prayer, Nick and I will be up here, and go in peace.